Clara was only 9 years old, but she already carried on her shoulders a sadness that seemed greater than her. His eyes, huge and bright, seemed to hide the whole world inside them, a world of silent dreams, fears kept under lock and key, and a stubborn hope that insisted on not dying, even when everything around him screamed otherwise. She had lived in the orphanage since she was 4 years old, but to this day no one knew much about her. It was as if she had been forgotten by life. She always sat in the same corner of the room, hugging her old notebook, where she drew and wrote small stories that no one read. No one asked if she was okay. No one noticed when she cried hidden under the thin blanket. She was alive, but it was as if it didn't exist. While other children ran, fought, laughed, Clara was a silence that went unnoticed in the hallway, the child who was never called by name, the one at the back of the line, the one who received the broken toys, the shoes with the torn shoelaces, the clothes that no one wanted, not out of explicit malice, but out of neglect, out of inattention, maybe because he never asked for anything, perhaps because he always seemed to be content with little, maybe because, for many people, those who don't speak loudly don't feel. But Clara felt it. I was sorry. I felt the emptiness of having no one, the cold that came not only from time, but from the absence of hugs, affection, a simple question. Do you want to play with us? The orphanage was noisy during the day, but for Clara, everything was silent. She watched others as if watching a movie from afar. He didn't see himself in those scenes. It didn't fit. It was as if there was an invisible wall between her and the rest of the world. A wall made of small but constant rejections. And over time, he learned not to wait, not to expect company, not to wait for an answer, not to expect choice. No one chose Clara, neither for games nor for snacks, much less for adoption. On the wall of the cafeteria, there was a mural with photos of the children who had been adopted over the years. Fake smiles framed on colored paper, like trophies of a system that worked better for some than for others. Clara passed by that mural every day. He never stopped to look. I knew your picture wouldn't be there. And even if it was, who would care? The truth was cruel. No one really knew her, not even the adults who took care of the place. For them, Clara was just another mouth to feed, another name on a file, one more number among many. But even with all this, there was something about her that still shone. Something small, almost imperceptible, like the flame of a candle about to go out, but which insists on resisting the wind. It was there in that battered notebook that she carried everywhere, that Clara let slip what she could not say out loud. She wrote about places she had never been, about people who hugged her without asking, about colorful gardens where children could run fearlessly and laugh until they lost their breath. He drew houses with open windows, with curtains dancing in the wind, and the smell of cake coming out of the oven. It was there that she really lived. That was where it existed. When the day was over, Clara would curl up in bed, hugging her notebook, while the other children whispered, played, or argued about who was going to sleep on top of the bunk. She was not part of any of it. Sometimes, an employee would ask him if he had already brushed his teeth, or if he had put the dish away. But it was never more than that. There was never time to listen. There was never room to feel. And yet, day after day, Clara continued. Woke up. She dressed herself. He made his bed carefully, and he hid in his imagination whenever he could. It was his way of surviving without screaming, to keep believing, even if no one said she could, because deep down she still had faith. Faith that someone someday would see what no one else saw. Faith that her story would not end there, at the back of the cafeteria, between crumbs of stale bread and laughter that did not include her. Sometimes, when the sun hit the living room window differently, Clara pretended it was a sign. When he found a colored pencil that was more complete than the others, he smiled discreetly, as if it were a gift. Small joys that no one noticed, but that meant everything to her. And so, in that almost invisible existence, Clara continued to be white, small, silent, ignored, but full of light inside. A light that just needed a right look, a right moment, a chance. If you've come this far, it's because you also felt something different in Clara. And that's why I invite you to enjoy this video and subscribe to the channel. so that more stories like this can be told. Shall we continue? Because something unexpected was about to happen. Clara's days in the orphanage seemed like badly taken copies of the same tired paper. It all started with the sound of the collective alarm clock, a rusty bell that tinkled too loudly at 6 in the morning. The other children woke up complaining, laughing, tripping over each other on the way to the bathroom. Clara, however, was already on her feet before the bell rang. She always woke up first, not out of anxiety, but out of habit, because she had learned that in the few minutes of silence before the day's turmoil, she could better hear her own thoughts. He made the bed with almost ceremonial care, folding the thin blanket as he had once seen in an old magazine. Then he would put on his shoes with uneven laces, run his hand over straight hair that was rarely combed by anyone, and leave slowly, his notebook always close to his chest, like an invisible shield against the indifference of the world. In the cafeteria, the wooden benches creaked under the weight of the excited children, fighting for bread with margarine and glasses of warm milk. Clara sat in the corner, as always. No one cared who sat with whom. She knew that, and I had already given up waiting for invitations. He ate slowly, sometimes looking out the window, sometimes watching the crumbs on the plate. That was all the day promised. More silences, more invisibility, more attempts not to attract attention. Because in the orphanage, being noticed was not always a good thing. Being noticed could mean being the target of cruel jokes, hidden slaps, words that hurt more than any punishment. Clara had learned not to be a target. He had learned to disappear, without moving from his place. After breakfast, while the other children ran to the courtyard, Clara went to the reading room, a place not frequented, with the smell of dust and forgotten books. He sat on the floor, with his back resting on the shelf, and opened his notebook. It was there that the world changed. While outside the laughter echoed and the employees shouted orders to keep order, Clara immersed herself in stories she invented with her fingertips. Stories of girls who flew, of worlds where no one was left aside, of homes where dinner was accompanied by affectionate questions and warm smiles. He drew magic doors, talking trees, little houses made of books, and cats with eyes that saw into people's hearts. The notebook was old, with folded edges and some loose sheets, but was all she had. All that was true. She wrote with a small, worn pencil, which she pointed out hidden with a blade that she kept as a treasure. Sometimes, when he finished a story, he would hug the notebook against his chest and close his eyes. It was as if, at that moment, he was somewhere else, a place where someone would wait for her with a hug and say, "I've read what you've written. It was beautiful." But no one read it. No one was ever interested in opening that notebook. The employees passed by it as if it were part of the furniture. One more table, a silent object in the corner of the room. One of the social workers once commented, without addressing her, that this girl lives in a world of the moon. Another said that at least she doesn't give trouble. And with that, Clara continued to be ignored, as if her calm was proof that she did not need care. There were days when the weight of loneliness was greater, like when visitors showed up, smiling families who came to choose children for adoption. On these occasions, the caregivers organized rows, arranged the girl's hair, put better clothes on some. Clara was last. It was not out of direct malice. It was as if she was invisible even to make-up attempts. No one asked if she wanted to be chosen. No one said, "Today is your day." She watched everything in silence, with a notebook on her lap, watching the families pass by, look around, smile, and then leave with one or another child who cried with emotion. Clara, on the other hand, never cried. She just closed her eyes for a moment, as if to say to herself, "You already knew." And he went back to writing, because in her imaginary world, she was always chosen. She was always seen. At night, when the light went out, Clara continued to draw in her head. She imagined what her life would be like if someone really saw her. She thought about what it would be like to have a room of her own, with a lamp and a place to store her books, a place where she could leave her pencils scattered without fear, where someone asked, "What are you writing today?" It was not a grandiose dream. It was just a simple desire, to be noticed. One afternoon, after another day like all the others, Clara was sitting on the concrete patio, her legs crossed, scribbling a new idea in the notebook. The sky was gray and the icy wind made the dry leaves dance around her. The other children played on the other side, playing ball, running, falling, and laughing. None of them even noticed Clara there, not even when the ball passed close to her, and she pushed it back with a timid kick. Not even a thank you was heard. It was as if she had done nothing. But that day something was different. One of the employees, who rarely paid attention to her, looked at her for a moment and commented to another, "This girl always has this notebook. He lives drawing. Strange, isn't it?" The other shrugged, as if the comment was not worth a response. But Clara listened. He heard and felt something strange inside his chest, a twinge that mixed hope and fear. Hope that, perhaps, someone was beginning to see. Fear that it was just another illusion. Even so, that night at bedtime, Clara wrote more than usual. He wrote as if he were preparing for something big, even without knowing what. The words flowed like a river after the rain. The stories seemed to want to escape the paper. It was as if the notebook knew that something was about to change, as if those worn-out pages were about to tell not only invented stories, but a real story which had not yet begun. The rain fell thin and steadily, turning the orphanage's courtyard into a sea of murky puddles. The trees swayed slowly, as if feeling the weight of the gray afternoon. It was a kind of day that made everything quieter than usual, as if even the children's laughter had been drowned out by the sound of water running down the gutters. Inside the main hall, the smell of wet floors mixed with that of old paint and soaked wood. The dim lights flickered like candles about to go out. Clara was there, in her usual corner, sitting on the floor near the library shelf, with the notebook open on her lap and the pencil between her fingers. She scribbled slowly, as if each stroke was a thread connecting her to a world where time was kinder. It was then that she heard it. The sound did not come from the children or the employees. It was different. Footsteps, firm, decisive, echoed in the hallway. Then the slow creak of the main door opening. The rain hit harder for a second, as if the outside world wanted to invade that forgotten shelter. And then she walked in. The black, wet leather shoes were the first thing Clara saw. The marble floor left marks of the path she took to the reception. The employees, who were talking in low voices, interrupted the conversation for a moment and looked at the woman with a contained expression of surprise. It was not common for them to receive visitors on days like that, much less someone like her. The woman brought with her an antique leather suitcase, heavy, with golden clasps already rusted by time. He wore a dark blue coat, simple but elegant, and he carried a closed umbrella in one hand, which dripped discreetly on the carpet at the entrance. His face had marks of time, but his eyes, his eyes, were lively, attentive, as if they were looking for something they did not yet know how to name. Clara watched her from a distance, half hidden behind the bookshelf, as she did whenever someone new appeared, not out of fear, but out of habit, because she knew that people came, looked and left without even noticing that she was there. But this woman, there was something about her that looked different. Clara did not know how to explain. Maybe it was the way she looked around, with a kind of quiet curiosity. Or maybe it was the way he walked, not in a hurry, nor with that cold distance of someone who just wanted to fulfill an obligation. There was something there, an invisible detail, a restlessness that Clara felt even before she understood why. The woman introduced herself at the reception with few words. He only said that he wanted to make a donation. No clothes, toys, or food. She brought books, old books kept for years that needed a new home. The employees exchanged glances with each other, half surprised, half indifferent. The donation was accepted, of course, but with that usual bureaucratic tone, like someone stamping papers without knowing what they are authorizing. The woman thanked him with a faint smile and began to open the suitcase, revealing stacks and stacks of fabric-covered books, with worn spines, smelling of dust and history. Clara watched everything from afar, with her eyes fixed on that suitcase as if she were in front of a treasure chest. And, in a way, that was it. Each book that came out of there was a promise. Of new worlds, of adventures never told before, of words that could take her away. Her heart beat faster, but her body remained motionless. He wanted to get closer, touch, ask, but he couldn't. He didn't know how to approach someone. I didn't know if I could. That's when the woman's eyes crossed hers. It was for a second, just a moment, but it was enough for Clara to feel as if she had been seen for the first time in a long time. The woman did not smile or say anything. He just looked at her with a look that seemed to see beyond silence. Then he went back to organizing the books. The employees, without much interest, left a suitcase in the corner of the reading room and thanked him, ready to end the visit. But the woman hesitated. He looked around once more, as if something was still incomplete. He walked slowly around the room, observing the details. The old paintings on the wall, the broken toys in the basket, the bookshelf with poorly organized books. And then he saw the notebook. He was lying on the ground. Clara, in her haste to hide even further behind the bookshelf, had let the notebook slip from her lap. The woman approached, knelt gently and picked up the object as if she were finding something valuable in the midst of ruins. He ran his fingers over the worn cover, opened it slowly, and his eyes began to scan the pages. That was where everything was. The stories, the drawings, Clara's words, spread like whispers that no one ever wanted to hear. The woman turned one page, then another, and yet another. Each line seemed to capture not only a child's imagination, but also a forgotten emotion, a pent-up pain, a timid but pulsating hope. The strokes were simple, but they had life. The story spoke of abandonment, but also of courage, of fear, but also of love. And there was something in each of them that seemed to speak directly to the woman's heart. Clara watched, her chest tightened, her face half hidden, not knowing whether to flee or approach. I was terrified. That had never happened before. No one had ever opened his notebook. No one had ever immersed himself in his world. It was as if someone had finally walked through the door that she had always kept locked. The woman closed the notebook carefully. He looked toward the bookshelf, where Clara was still partially hidden, and, in a soft voice, he only said, "Is it yours?" Clara did not answer. He just nodded, slowly, as if any sudden movement could undo what was happening. The woman smiled, this time tenderly, a light but true smile. Then he sat right there, on the living room floor, with the notebook on his lap. He said nothing more. He just stood there, turning the pages slowly, as if he wanted to absorb every word, every image, every secret. And Clara, for the first time, sat next to someone. Time seemed to stop. The rain was still beating outside, but inside everything was calm, hot, alive. It was as if the world had finally stopped to listen to what Clara had to say. And she, for the first time, didn't need to use words to be understood. The woman remained there for hours, and no one dared to interrupt, neither the employees nor the other children. It was as if everyone instinctively knew that something special was happening, that something was being born there, in the silence of forgotten room, between yellowed pages and stored dreams. When the woman finally got up, with the notebook in her hands, she looked at Clara one last time and said, "Can I come back tomorrow?" Clara didn't know what to answer. He just smiled, a shy smile, almost imperceptible, but which at that moment was stronger than any words. And in that brief moment, in the midst of the rain outside and the smell of an old book inside, a connection was born that would change everything. Because sometimes the miracle doesn't come with bright lights or grandiose music. Sometimes he comes with wet footsteps on the floor and eyes that see beyond what is shown. The suitcase was still there, in the corner of the room. But now, it was Clara who carried something valuable in her heart. Something she had never felt before, being seen. And what would this woman do next? Well, that was yet to happen. The suitcase was almost empty. The old books had been delivered with a care that revealed more than generosity. It revealed nostalgia. The woman walked around the room with the air of someone looking for something that even she could not name. The eyes ran over the walls, the toys, the details forgotten in the corners. The voices of the employees mingled with the sporadic laughter of the children running through the narrow corridors. But she seemed to hear something beyond, as if he heard the silence within each wall, as if looking for an answer in the muffled sound of rain outside. It was at that moment that the unexpected happened. As he rounded a pile of books stacked near the window, his feet touched something light, soft, which slid away and fell open on the floor. A notebook. The cover, although worn, still retained traces of a color that was once alive. It was Clara's notebook. The woman bent down by instinct, perhaps by reflex, perhaps guided by something deeper. She knelt down, her knees finding the cold, hard floor, and turned her gaze to the open page before her. What he saw made time stop. For a second, she forgot about the noise of the rain, the creaking of the door at the back, the voices of the caregivers that echoed without direction. It was as if there was only that, the sheet before her eyes, the childish but firm stroke, the words that jumped out of the paper as if they wanted to speak to her directly. On that page, Clara had drawn a girl sitting under a crooked tree, with a notebook in her hands and a heart-shaped cloud hovering above her head. Next to it, words written in large and careful letters. The tree told secrets to those who knew how to listen with their hearts. The woman could not explain why those words crossed her so intensely, but something inside her broke, or maybe it would fit. She put her hand to her mouth, as if she needed to contain something that had been rising inside, a sob, perhaps a memory. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't blink. He remained there, motionless, looking at that piece of paper as if he had just found an old photograph that he thought lost forever. Clara, from a distance, watched with her chest tightened. That left her confused. Why would anyone cry reading one of the stories? No one had ever given it so much importance. Neither the caregivers nor the other children. Sometimes, even she herself doubted if it all had any value. But here was this strange woman, who had barely spoken her name, kneeling on the floor, cry before a page drawn with cheap pencil. What did that woman see there that no one else saw? The silence between them grew thick. The woman turned the page with careful hands, as if afraid of hurting something sacred. He read another passage, this time a dialogue between two characters, a stone and a butterfly. The stone said that it missed being carried away by the river. The butterfly replied, "You can still be light, even standing still. Just let the wind visit you." The tears now flowed more freely. It was not sadness, it was recognition, that spoke to a part of her that had been dormant for a long time, an old pain, but also a forgotten tenderness. The woman closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. It was as if, in the midst of children's stories, she had rediscovered something she had left behind, a memory, a promise, maybe even a piece of herself. She slowly looked at the corner of the room and met Clara's eyes. This time, there was no fear in them. There was curiosity. There was expectation. The woman held out the notebook with both hands, offering it back, but her eyes said something else. They said, "Thank you." Clara approached slowly, her steps short, as if she were crossing an unstable ground. He stopped in front of his wife, hesitantly. The notebook now seemed heavier, as if carrying something that exceeded the pages. The woman held the notebook for an extra second before releasing it, and in that long touch, the hands of the two touched. It was fast, but it was enough to light something. A link formed there between shy fingers and teary eyes. Clara realized that there was an unspoken question in those adult eyes, a question that perhaps had no easy answer, but that was there. How do you know? And the truth is that Clara didn't know. The stories came, they just came, as if they were whispered in her ears by something that only she could hear, as if, when drawing, writing, she put on paper feelings that she didn't even know she had, but that seemed to find an echo in hearts like that woman's. The woman then stood up slowly, as if leaving something of herself on the floor. He looked at Clara with a mixture of astonishment and tenderness. There was more than curiosity now. There was a need, a silent urgency that she herself still did not understand, but it pulsated. "Did you write that yourself?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. Clara nodded, and for the first time he said, "These are stories I dreamed of." The woman smiled, a smile full of memory, as if he had just found a mirror that shows the past and the future at the same time. The suitcase with the books seemed irrelevant now. She had already received more than she brought. He took another step, but stopped before leaving the room. She turned sideways, her gaze still fixed on Clara, and said, almost to herself. I also wrote when I was little. Clara widened her eyes. That wasn't just a coincidence. It didn't sound like talk thrown to the wind. It sounded like a confession, like the revelation of an ancient secret, shared between two people who didn't even know they were waiting for each other. On the wall, the clock marked the end of the afternoon. The gray light that came into the window was now tinged with a faint golden hue, as if the sky wanted to participate in that meeting, too. The employees called, warning that it was time for the visitor to leave. The woman made a slight wave, but her eyes remained on Clara. She wanted to say something more, but he didn't. There were moments that didn't need words. Clara, with the notebook pressed to her chest, stood there, still, watching the woman walk away, with the strange feeling that, even without understanding, this would not be a goodbye, and without knowing exactly why, she felt that something inside her had changed, as if a seed had been planted there, in the silence of a page lying on the ground. The notebook now seemed more alive, as if the stories it contained began to gain a new destination. And Clara knew that this woman would come back. But not only that, something was coming. Something that, until then, she only knew through the dreams she transformed into words. That night fell like a veil over the shelter. The rain, which had once filled the silence with its constant drumming, now gave way to a timid wind, which whispered to the corners and made the windows shake. The sound of children being collected, the lights partially turned off, the smell of soap in the air, everything seemed to go back to normal, as if the day had been just another one. But Clara knew something had changed, inside her, in the eyes of the woman who had left, in the notebook that now rested on her lap with new weight. She still didn't fully understand what she felt, but there was a strange certainty springing up. This story wouldn't end there. Meanwhile, in another corner of the city, the woman who had knelt before Clara's pages walked through the dark streets with slow steps, as if carrying on her shoulders not only rainwater, but memories that she had long avoided touching. Her name was Helena, and it had been years since he had been allowed to visit certain memories. They were stored as boxes locked in an emotional attic that she herself avoided revisiting. But that notebook, those words, had turned all the keys at the same time. When she got home, she dropped her bag on the sofa, took off her soaked coat, and stood there, without turning on any lights. The only light came from the street, filtered through the thin curtain of the window. She sat in the armchair and brought her hands to her face, as if trying to hold back the flood of thoughts that invaded every corner of her mind. It wasn't just emotion. It was something deeper, a silent, frightening, and at the same time, inexplicably beautiful recognition. She had lost her little sister when she was still a teenager. Little Beatrice was only 7 years old when she fell ill, a rare, fast, devastating disease. And yet, until the last day, Beatrice drew. He wrote short stories, dialogue between animals and objects, small tales that seemed made of magic. Helena kept some of these sheets in a blue box, hidden in the back of the closet, a treasure she almost never had the courage to open. But now everything was back, because Clara wrote the same way, with the same naivety and depth mixed with that sensitivity that seemed to touch places that not even adults could reach. The children's metaphors, the phrases that sounded like whispers of the invisible, the way the words danced alongside the drawings. It was as if someone had reached out beyond time, beyond life, and found the lost thread of that interrupted childhood. Helena remembered a specific story that Beatrice had written, one in which a girl found a paper bird that only sang when it was read aloud by someone sad. Because sadness, when shared, becomes music, said the bird. And in Clara's notebook, a very similar passage. Words sleep until someone needs to dream about them. It wasn't just similar. It was the same spirit, the same tone. She tried to rationalize. Maybe it was a coincidence. Perhaps sensitive children think in similar ways. But there was no denying it. The feeling of reunion was overwhelming. As if little Beatrice had left, at some point in time, seeds of herself scattered around the world, and Clara had found one, or all of them. The strongest memory came suddenly. Helena, still a teenager, sitting on the floor of the room with Beatrice by her side, both scribbling in notebooks, creating stories together. The younger sister asked, "If I leave one day, will my story still exist?" And Helena answered without hesitation, "Go, because words have wings." But when Beatrice left, the pain was so great that Helena could no longer write. She put down her own notebooks, hid her sisters, and went on with life as she could, until today. Even Clara, even those phrases that seemed to come directly from the girl's mouth that she never forgot. She rose from her chair with an almost childlike impulse. She opened the cupboard, took out the blue box, and there they were, Beatrice's leaves, yellowed by time, with the smell of storage and emotion. He began to read one by one, and with each page his heart ached and healed at the same time. And the more she read, the more certainty she gained. Clara wrote with the soul of someone who knows an old pain and transforms it into beauty. Faith in the improbable, which Helena had left behind, was now lit like a stubborn candle in the darkness. What if there was something bigger operating behind it? Something that escapes logic, but makes sense within the heart? She couldn't explain it. I only knew how to feel. In the days that followed, Helena couldn't get Clara out of her mind. He returned to his sister's drawings and to the excerpts he remembered from the notebook of the girl in the shelter. There were phrases echoing in her strongly. Sometimes we plant nostalgia and harvest memory. Was it Clara's? Was it Beatrice's? Or both at the same time? Meanwhile, in the shelter, Clara returned to her usual silence. But there was something different about his breathing, a new lightness, as if that small contact had given him back the courage to dream deeper. His drawings became even more detailed, the stories more poetic. It was as if something inside her had woken up and now refused to go back to sleep. She also felt that this meeting had left its mark, not the kind that hurt, but the kind that pointed the way. Clara did not know the woman's name. No one had said it, but his presence had been engraved. And inside her, a question hammered day after day. Why did she cry? One late afternoon, Clara sat alone near the bookshelf where the donated books had been left. He ran his fingers over the spine of one of them, opened it at random, and found a dedication. To the words that heal, even when we don't understand why. The lyrics were firm, adult, but carried emotion. She didn't know who had written it. Maybe the mysterious woman. Maybe another donor. But that seemed like an answer without a question. An echo with the notebook in her lap. Clara began a new story. This time, it wasn't about rocks or butterflies. It was about a girl who discovered that her drawings told secrets of people she had never met. And the more he wrote, the more the story took on a life of its own, as if it was being blown into her ear by a voice that wasn't exactly hers. Helena, in turn, took courage for something that would have seemed impossible before, to return to the shelter, not as an ordinary visitor, but with a purpose that I still didn't know how to name. Perhaps to thank you, maybe to understand, or, who knows, to find in Clara the answer to a question that she herself did not know how to ask. The bridge between the two was now built, invisible to the eyes of others, but firm as an ancient root that pierces the ground silently, until it finds another lost root. Time, which so often separates, now seemed to work to unite. And deep in the soul of each one, something said that this was no coincidence. It was a reunion. The next morning, the shelter woke up to a soft light that pierced the windows in golden beams. The rain had given a respite, and the smell of wet earth still wafted in the air. Children ran to the courtyard with disheveled hair, slippers flapping against the cement floor, and laughter echoing through the hallways. But Clara, as always, preferred the quieter corner of the improvised library, with a notebook on her knees and a pencil dancing between her fingers. Her face was concentrated, but there was a lightness to her expression, as if something inside her had been different since that night. She drew a girl standing in front of a huge tree, whose branches extended out of the page, as if the rest of the story could only be told if the notebook had infinite space. She didn't even notice when the door creaked slowly. He only noticed his presence when a shadow formed next to him, and a soft voice broke the silence without asking permission. "Good morning, Clara." The pencil froze in the air. The girl looked up, startled. She was the woman she was before, the same one who had cried at his words, who had touched the notebook so carefully that it seemed to carry a piece of herself inside. Clara hesitated, but shook her head lightly, as if confirming a name that has never been forgotten. It was strange. The caregivers never called her that. They used to just say, "Girl, you there?" or "Hey." But that woman knew her name. He knew, and spoke as if he already knew her, as if they were resuming a conversation that had begun in another life. The woman crouched down in front of her, unhurriedly, as if respecting the other's time. The eyes were calm, but there was an intensity that vibrated in silence. She didn't say anything else for a few seconds. He only observed the unfinished drawing. He lightly touched the side of the sheet with his fingertips, without invading, as if asking permission with a gesture. "That tree, does it grow out of the paper?" Clara, still surprised, bit her lip shyly and nodded. "It's because the stories she keeps are too big to fit just in here." The woman smiled tenderly. "Do you know what that means, Clara?" The girl shook her head, speechless. "It means you have a gift that needs to be shown to the world." The phrase hung in the air like a revelation. Clara lowered her eyes, feeling a strange heat in her chest. She had never heard anything like this. No one had ever told her that her scribbles could mean something outside of there. In fact, they always had their notebooks. They said it was a waste of time, that it was better to sweep the floor than to draw birds with party hats. But that woman, she saw not only the drawings, she saw Clara, and it made something inside the girl shudder in a way she couldn't name. It was fear and joy together, as if she were facing an old dream that she was always ashamed to tell. "Can I sit here with you?" The question was asked with delicacy, as if respecting sacred territory. Clara nodded again, and the woman sat down next to her, without taking her eyes from the notebook. "Do you write these stories yourself?" She nodded, her look still suspicious, but curious. "Since when?" Clara shrugged, shrugging her thin shoulders under the oversized coat. "For as long as I can remember," he murmured almost inaudibly. The woman smiled, this time with a different twinkle in her eye. "I had a sister who also wrote like that, small like you, with a huge heart and an even greater imagination. His words, they remind me so much." Clara didn't know what to say, but he felt that, somehow, there was a connection there that didn't need to be explained. "And tell me, have you ever thought about publishing a book?" The question fell like a stone into the calm lake that was Clara's mind. Book? She? Publish? It was something as distant as the planets in the astronomy books I secretly leafed through. "I think no one would read it," he whispered. The woman turned to her with firmness and sweetness. "I would read it. And not only me. Many people need your stories, Clara, because there are people who live in the dark and only understand the world when someone lights a flashlight with words. And you have this flashlight in your hands." The girl felt her eyes burn. He took a deep breath, looking away. I was thrilled, but also confused. What did that woman want from her? Why was he saying all that? It wasn't just kindness. There was something deeper. Something she still couldn't reach, but that pulled her forward, like an invisible rope tied to her destiny. "Will you let me read more of your stories?" Clara, after a moment of silence, slowly turned the pages of the notebook until she found one with drawings of a girl and a bear. It was a fable that had not yet ended, but it spoke of courage and fear. The woman read each line as if listening to an old song, and when he finished, he looked at Clara as if he found something precious. "You write as if you were listening to what the world doesn't say. This is rare. Clara, that's too beautiful." The girl blushed, lowering her gaze again, but a discreet smile escaped the corner of her mouth. He was shy but true. For the first time, someone could see more than her eyes. Someone saw what was inside. The woman then held out her hand. "My name is Helena." Clara took a second, but squeezed gently. "Clara," he said, as if for the first time he had said his name with pride. And in that simple gesture, in that brief touch, something sealed between the two. It wasn't just gratitude. It was a mute promise, born of mutual recognition, as if they both knew in silence that this meeting was not a coincidence. It was destiny. They spent more than an hour there. They talked little, but the word that came out had the weight of 1,000. Helena didn't force anything. He just listened, asked carefully, and let Clara guide the pace. When they needed silence, silence was comfortable. When one sentence was born, the other welcomed it. And at a given moment, while Clara showed another, older notebook with almost erased stories, Helena said, "You already have everything. All that remains is for the world to know. And I want to help with that." There was no immediate response. But Clara, this time, did not doubt. He did not run away. He just took a deep breath, as if recognizing that the time had come to open the window. That day, when the woman said goodbye, she didn't say goodbye. She only said, "See you later, writer." And Clara stood there, still, with her soul agitated and her heart light. For the first time, the word writer seemed to match her, and everything about her said that this was just the beginning. In the following days, Clara could not think of anything else. The conversation with Helena, that woman who seemed to be part of the story that she herself did not know how to tell, did not leave her mind. It was as if a whole world had opened up before her. But at the same time, a lingering doubt lingered in her chest. That kindness, that watchful look, those compliments, it all seemed too good to be real. She knew what it was like to be ignored, left aside, lost in the midst of so many children. And now, someone wanted not only to see her, but to welcome her. The idea of being chosen seemed impossible, almost a dream. And then the unexpected happened. That afternoon, the noise of children playing outside seemed more distant. Clara was sitting on the bench by the window, with the notebook open on her legs. But the words did not come. His thoughts were elsewhere. Suddenly, the door to the room opened softly, and the woman appeared again. She was not alone. Next to her were those in charge of the orphanage, who had already seen Clara's glow. But now something was different. Helena's look was more serious, but no less gentle. It was as if a decision was about to be made, a decision that would change everything. Clara stood up automatically, the notebook falling slightly on the table, but she did not take it out. There was something about her posture that made her feel that this conversation would not be like the others. The weight in the air was different. And Helena, with her soft but firm voice, said the words that made Clara's world fall apart at once. "Clara, I want to ask you something," she said, looking directly into the girl's eyes. The silence was profound, but it wasn't loaded with tension. It was more like a moment of complicity. "Do you want to come with me, Clara? I want to give you a new home. I want you to continue writing. I want you to be who you really are, with all the potential I know you have. I see what you can do." Clara felt as if the ground had disappeared from under her feet. Those words didn't make sense right away. It was an offer so full of warmth, of care, that it seemed impossible. All her life, she had been treated like a number, a face among so many. No one had looked at her with such pure, non-judgmental eyes. No word until then had been so true and full of promise. Helena did not wait for Clara to answer immediately. She knew that words needed no hurry. The silence between them was a strong link, a space where the decision began to be born. But Clara, still in shock, felt something break inside her. It wasn't fear, but an emotion she couldn't recognize. Her eyes began to fill with tears, but she held them back tightly. No one had ever spoken to her like that. She didn't know what to do with so much emotion, with that whirlwind of feelings. The memories of her lonely childhood, of the days spent within the walls of the orphanage, the certainty that she would be left behind, all those images clashed with the new reality that Helena was offering. The woman wanted her to be more than a nameless girl, more than a sad face. She wanted Clara to be free to write, to express herself, to grow. She wanted to give Clara a new home, and not just walls and ceiling, but a space where her soul could be fed. This, for Clara, was more than a dream. It was the possibility of finally being seen. "Do you want to come with me?" Helena's voice again filled the space, now softer, almost a whisper, as if she also feared that the answer was no. But Clara already knew, deep in her being, that she couldn't let this chance slip away. She knew she would never have anything like it. She would never have another opportunity to get out of that rut of uncertainty. With a hesitant movement, Clara looked at her hands, as if she was waiting for an answer from them. All she had, all she had at that moment, was the notebook that was in her possession. It was there that his dreams, his stories, his reason for existing lived. With a deep sigh, she finally looked at those responsible and then at Helena, and with her eyes shining with emotion, murmured, "Yes, I want to go." It was a shy yes, but loaded with meaning. And in that moment, Clara knew that something inside her had changed forever. The words were simple, but their weight was immeasurable. She would finally be chosen, not just as an orphan child, but as someone with a future, with the chance to rewrite their history. When Helena held out her hand, Clara did not hesitate to take it. The tears that had once been suppressed now silently ran down his face. But they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of a weight being lifted from her shoulders, of a new beginning that was taking shape before her. She shook Helena's hand tightly, as if clinging to the only chance she had in life to be more than what others saw. The next moment was quick. Clara didn't need much to pack her few things. Her suitcase was almost empty. A piece of her favorite dress, her notebook, a pair of worn-out shoes, and a few simple toys which she hadn't touched in a long time. All she owned was something that could fit in a single corner of a new home. But even with so little, Clara felt that she was carrying the world with her. She looked one last time to Orphanage, at those cold walls that had welcomed her when no one else cared. She felt a little pain in her chest, but at the same time a lightness. The tears kept falling, but they were now like a river flowing into a new path. The old notebook was in her hands, and it was all she needed. That little sheet of paper, with all its stories and secrets, was about to find a new home, and Clara, with her heart pounding, knew that her life was just beginning. The first days in the new house were like a blank book for Clara. When she arrived, still with the weight of the orphanage's farewell on her shoulders, the environment around her seemed immense, and at the same time, too quiet. Helena's house didn't have the constant noise of children playing in the hallways, or the sound of the voices of the other orphans calling to each other. It was a serene place, where silence seemed to speak louder than any words. The girl, so accustomed to the hustle and bustle and lack of privacy, felt an initial discomfort. However, something about her knew that it was a reflection of something bigger, a new beginning. She entered the room that would now be hers, and something inside her snapped, but in a sweet way, as if the house was taking her broken pieces and trying to put them back together. The room was simple, but it had something magical. The walls in a soft tone, the furniture that seemed cozy, and what touched her the most, the reading corner with a comfortable chair and a study table. Next to the bed, there was a large window, through which the sun came in every morning, warming the rooms with a soft light. But what really made Clara's eyes shine was a shelf full of new books. She had never imagined having so many books at her disposal, and with each one she picked up, she felt a silent joy. The woman, with the welcoming smile of someone who knows that there is much to be done, accompanied her on that first day. Helena watched her with a look full of understanding and patience. It was obvious to her that Clara was still processing everything that had happened, that the girl did not quite understand what the future held for her, but she knew that, in time, everything would fall into place. She was there to be the secure foundation that Clara never had, and that meant being present at all times, encouraging, showing that the new home would be, in fact, your home. The woman knew that Clara had much more to offer the world than she could have imagined at that moment. That night, while Clara was leafing through one of the books and feeling the weight of silence around her, Helena approached with a cup of tea. He sat down next to her and, with a softness that seemed to fit perfectly into the moment, began to talk to her about what he would do next. It was not an ordinary conversation, but a genuine exchange of thoughts. The woman knew that Clara had a gift. Something inside her had always known, from the first meeting, that Clara was not just a quiet and lonely girl, but a creative mind, full of stories waiting to be told. "I know you like to write, Clara," Helena said, with a smile that left no room for doubt. "I saw his drawings and his texts. I saw what you have inside you. Did you know that if you want, you can show it to the world? He has a very beautiful way of telling stories. I believe this can be a great thing for you." Clara looked up from the book and looked at her curiously. She didn't know what Helena meant, but her words ignited something inside her. She always hid in her stories. She always kept everything to herself because no one had ever been interested. Now, someone was talking about it in a different way, as if it was possible to make them real. I don't know, Helena, Clara replied shyly. Would anyone like to read what I write? I just have this old notebook, and... Helena interrupted the girl with a delicate gesture, touching her hand gently. Of course, you have a rare talent, Clara. People will enjoy reading your stories. But for that, you need to keep writing. And if you need help, I'm here to support you. Those words touched Clara deeply. She knew that the woman did not speak out of politeness or because she wanted to please her. She spoke with the certainty of someone who knew what she was saying. Clara felt, for the first time, capable, and for the first time, she believed that what she had to offer could be more than just an escape. The words she would write could be a path for her, a path she would choose to follow. In the following days, Clara began to get used to her new routine. In the morning, after a quiet breakfast with Helena, she would retire to her room and begin to write. With each word that popped into her mind, her heart seemed to warm up a little more. She wrote about simple things, about what she saw through the window, about the sound of leaves falling from the trees in autumn, about the books she began to devour. What once seemed like a lonely journey now had a purpose. Clara felt that her words had meaning, and, more importantly, they were beginning to be heard. Helena, noticing the girl's commitment, decided to take the next step. She knew that if Clara was truly able to accomplish what her heart desired, she would need a little push. So, she began to help the girl record her text in a more organized way. He bought her new notebooks, colored pencils, and art supplies because he knew that Clara needed more than just words to express herself. She needed the freedom to be creative. She began to suggest that the girl also record her drawings, her visual thoughts, alongside the stories she wrote. The result was something indescribable. Clara felt free, an artist in her own essence. Over time, Helena also encouraged Clara to share some of her stories on social media. At first, the idea seemed strange, even terrifying to the girl. But after a few months of encouragement, Clara allowed herself to try. He published a simple, almost shy short story, accompanied by a delicate illustration. The post, without great expectations, soon won the hearts of some people. With each comment, Clara felt her chest fill with a new emotion, something she had not known until then. The feeling of being seen, of being recognized. Helena's words resonated in her mind. You have a gift, Clara. People need to see that. And people started to see it. The audience on social networks began to grow slowly. It was an explosive success, but every comment, every message of support, made Clara feel more confident in her path. She felt that she was somehow going in the right direction. The old notebook she had carried from her days in the orphanage now became a time capsule, keeping every step of her growth, every change of perspective. And most of all, she had something she never imagined she had before. Hope. The same hope that began to be born in that silent room, when she realized that, for the first time, she was being truly seen. Clara's transformation was slow, but intense. Each day she spent at Helena's house seemed to be a new chapter in her life story, a chapter she had never imagined writing. With the books and notebooks scattered around her, Clara began to feel that the words were more than just letters. They were a refuge, a pathway to other worlds, and most importantly, a means of healing. She felt she was in the right place, creating stories that could touch other people just like her in a deep and often painful place. When she published her first story on social media, she didn't imagine that small gesture would change her life forever. What started with a simple post, a short story accompanied by a simple drawing, soon turned into something bigger. Clara was just sharing her thoughts, her innermost feelings, her experiences with loneliness, and the discovery of a new home. But something about her she didn't know. The words she shared were echoing in the hearts of many other people. Suddenly, the young woman who had always felt invisible began to be noticed. His talent was there, between the lines of each story, in the pages loaded with emotion and humanity. It was on a quiet morning, while Clara was reviewing her latest publications, that the miracle happened. A message appeared in his inbox from an editor. At first, She thought it was just a joke or perhaps a mistake by a fan. But when she opened the message, she realized that something truly extraordinary was happening. The publisher praised her stories and made her a proposal she had never imagined: publish her first book. It was as if reality was unfolding before her, with the speed of a dream becoming concrete. It was a unique opportunity, which she could hardly believe, but at the same time she felt it was deserved, because this was a continuation of her own miracle. The path to publication was not simple. Clara had to revisit her texts, review her emotions, sometimes doubt herself. But she had Helena by her side, the woman who encouraged her to continue, who encouraged her whenever doubts arose. "You have a unique gift, Clara. Remember that," said Helena, always attentive to the needs of the young writer. And it was with this confidence that Clara gave herself to the process. She wasn't just writing a book. She was writing her story, her transformation. It was as if she was putting on paper everything she had learned. That pain could be transformed into art, that fear could be overcome with courage, and that loneliness, when shared, becomes light. When the first book was finally published, Clara couldn't believe it was real. The cover, with a charming illustration that she had made herself, represented the journey of a girl who, like her, found her own voice through writing. The book arrived at bookstores and soon began to attract the attention of readers, especially children. They were seen in Clara's words, in the stories of overcoming and friendship, in the adventures of characters who fought against the deepest fears. It was as if Clara had become the voice of all the children who, like her, had already felt invisible or alone. Success was not long in coming. Clara was invited to participate in literary fairs, meetings with young readers, and even to give lectures in schools. She became a promising young writer, with a career that seemed to have started from nothing, but which in fact has always been a part of her essence, waiting to be discovered. Each new book cover she released was a reflection of her own evolution. Clara was no longer hidden in the shadows of an orphanage or in the pages of an old notebook. She was now in the light, inspiring others with her words. Gradually, she began to understand the impact her stories had on people's lives. Letters from readers began to arrive, some simple, others deeply moving. Children wrote to him to thank him for the stories that helped them face loneliness, grief, fear. They saw themselves in Clara's characters, and their words served as a balm for broken hearts. "You don't know how much your story has helped me," read one letter. "I was feeling lonely, but after reading your book, I realized that I am not alone. You gave me hope." Another reader wrote, "Your story is like a hug. I don't know how to thank you, but I know that your words made me see life in a new way." These letters touched Clara deeply, and she began to understand that her mission was more than just writing for herself. She was helping others overcome the emotional barriers that had kept her silent for so long. She was using her own pain, her own journey, to light the path of others. It was as if somehow what had happened to her, the pain, the loneliness, the search for a place where she would be accepted, was being transformed into something much bigger, something that transcended her own experience. Readers began to clamor for her to write more. They wanted more stories, more characters to identify with, more words that could ease the pain and loneliness they still felt. Each new book published represented a new victory for Clara, and she knew that, as much as her words had the power to transform, the process of writing would never be simple. But she also knew that what she was doing was more than a profession. It was a mission. She was healing the world with what once saved her. His books began to be translated into other languages, bringing his stories to an even larger audience. Clara became an internationally recognized author, but she never let that change her. Fame and success did not keep her from her mission. She always remembered where she had come from and, with that, kept her feet on the ground, focused on what really mattered, the stories that could touch the hearts of children, of people who, like her, needed to find a way to deal with their own internal battles. At each autograph session, Clara found herself surrounded by smiling faces. But what touched her most was not the clapping and applause. What made her feel that it was all worth it were the simple but emotional words of the readers who approached, looked at her with tears in her eyes, and said, "You changed my life." This is what Clara understood now. Her work was not just to tell stories, but to provide healing, to be a bridge between suffering and hope, between pain and overcoming. And so, With each new book released, Clara not only fulfilled her destiny, but helped others find their own. She knew, more than ever, that the power of the word was something that could transform the world, like a single spark that ignites a flame in the hearts of all who have the courage to believe in it. Now, with Clara's story coming to an end, it is impossible not to be moved to see how a simple writing, a story, and an old notebook, which perhaps many thought insignificant, became the key to a new world. Clara, now a teenager with a completely transformed life, looks at that notebook, the same one that one day fell to the floor in a moment of pain and despair. She smiles, closes her eyes, and says, almost as if remembering her entire trajectory, "This is where it all began." How incredible it is to realize the impact that small decisions can have on our lives. Sometimes, it is in the midst of darkness that we find our light, and Clara knew how to do it in a unique way. Never underestimate someone's silent pain, as it can be the beginning of a great transformation. And most importantly, never doubt the power of a miracle. Life has a peculiar way of surprising us when we least expect it. Everything can change, and everything can start with a simple step, such as believing in yourself. If you've come this far, you already know that this story has something deep, something that touches the heart. And if you also believe that fate can act in ways we can't even imagine, tell me in the comments. Do you believe that fate can act when we least expect it? I want to know your opinion. Let's talk about it. Oh, and before you leave, don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed this exciting journey. Your like is like a virtual hug that lets me know that this connection was real. And there's a video here on the side that tells a similar story, a journey that will also move you. Click there and stay with me there.